Hello, Biology Part 1 class. This is your guided reading for the classification packet that I have left with your substitute today. I'm recording this video so that you have somebody to read with you any of those terrible, nasty words that you get to and you really have no idea what it's saying. But I do expect that if I am reading this to you, that you also are on the page following along word by word, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, so that you can better understand what this section is talking about. All right, so get this out. We're on page 1. This is talking about classification. So let's begin. What features do biologists use to group living things? You know that most plants are green and do not move around. You also know that most animals are not green and do move around. The tube worm, pictured in A to the left, lives in the water attached to one spot. It is not green. Is the tube worm a plant or an animal? The euglena in B is green and moves around in the water. Is it a plant or an animal, or does it belong to some other group? Biologists have a system for grouping living things. Each living thing that has a specific name that biologists all over the world understand. In this unit, you will learn why we group living things and about the system used to group them. Why are things grouped? How often do you classify things? You probably classify things more often than you think. To classify means to group things together based on things they have in common. Many things in our daily lives have been grouped for us. Think about how food is grouped in a grocery store. Frozen foods, meats, produce, bakery items, and canned foods are found in separate areas. What subjects are you taking this year? Don't you group your courses? Spanish, French, and German are language courses. Algebra, geometry, and calculus are math courses. How grouping helps us. There are several reasons to classify things. One reason is to put things in order so that they can become easier to find. Your school library must have thousands of books. They are arranged by a system of numbering that makes it easier to find a certain book. Think of trying to find a classroom with the numbers out of order. Could you find a phone number in a phone book if the names were not in alphabetical order? 2, the second reason we classify things is to show that they share certain traits. A trait is a feature that a thing has. In a library, you see biographies grouped together. What trait do they share? 3, the third reason is that it makes it easier to name new species when we discover them. You look for traits that are similar to something that is already named. Biologists classify living things. Doing so puts organisms in order. It also shows how they are alike. There are over 1.5 million known kinds of living things. It would be impossible to find information about them if they were not grouped in some way. Methods of classification. For hundreds of years, people have been grouping living things. The job has not been easy. What makes the job of classifying hard is that scientists do not always agree on how to group living things. Early classification. Over 2,000 years ago, a Greek scientist named Aristotle, pictured to the right, was one of the first people to classify living things. He noticed that living things fit into 2 main groups, green and did move. Aristotle next divided all animals into 3 groups. He based his groups on where the animals lived. Animals that lived in water went in one group. Animals that lived on land went into a second group. Animals that lived in the air and could fly made up a third group. Aristotle then worked out a system for grouping plants. He based it on size and pattern of growth. He divided plants into 3 smaller groups. Tall plants with one trunk were put into tree groups. Medium plants with many trunks were put into a shrub group. A burning bush that turns bright red when exposed to frost in the autumn is an example of a shrub. Small plants with soft stems went into an herb group. Herbs include grasses and wildflowers. The beginning of modern classification. Scientists use Aristotle's system of classification for hundreds of years. However, as scientists found more and more living things, Aristotle's system became less useful. Many of the newly discovered things did not fit into his system. In 1735, Carolus Linnaeus, pictured to the left, came up with a new classification system. Linnaeus put living things with similar traits into the same group and called this group a species. He used very specific traits for his groups. For example, he used flower parts to group plant species. He placed similar species into larger groups called a genus. Through his work, Linnaeus made a number of important changes in Aristotle's system. He classified plant and animals into more groups. He based his system on specific traits. He gave organisms names that described their traits. These names had two parts. All living things still have two-part names today. Today, there are 7 groups for classifying an organism: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. The kingdom is still the largest group of living things. Kingdoms are divided into groups called phyla, singular phylum. A phylum is the largest group within a kingdom. Phyla are divided into even smaller groups called classes. A class is the largest group within a phylum. Classes can be divided into groups called orders. An order is the largest group within a class. Orders are divided into families. A family is the largest group within an order. The largest group within a family is a genus. The smallest group of living things is a species. How scientists classify today. How do scientists know to which groups an organism belongs? They look at many traits. They compare the traits of one organism with those of another. Scientists also compare organisms living today with those that lived long ago. Let's look at how scientists classify living things. Classifying based on how an organism are related. Living things that are closely related are in many of the same classification groups. For example, if two plants are closely related, they will be in almost all of the same groups. If they are not closely related, they will not be in very many of the same groups. The table below shows a list of groups to which a house cat belongs. It also shows the traits for each group. You may recognize some of the group names. Many are from the Greek or Latin language. So house cat classification. So there's a group, the group name, and the group trait. So in the kingdom, house cats are an animal group. It has many cells and eats food, so it makes it an animal. We go further down into the phylum. Cats are chordates. That means that they have a rod-like structure along the back for support. That's their spine. Cats go even further. They are in the class mammal. That means that they nurse their young and they have hair. After that, we go to carnivore. So carnivores, they eat flesh. They have large teeth. Then their family is Felidae, which means they have sharp claws and large eyes. Their genus is Felis, that are small cats, and their species is Catus, which means cane. The table below compares the classification of 2 members of the class family, the house cat and the lion. So if we compare the classifications of a house cat and a lion, we'll look at all of their groups, how the house cat has its groups, then the lion, where its groups are, and then we can compare them. So the house cat and lion, they are both in the kingdom animal. They are both also in the same phylum. They are chordates. They have that long rod across their back, their spine. They are still in the same class of mammal, and their order carnivore. House cats and lions, they are both carnivores. They eat meat. Even they're in the same family, Felidae. They're the same family. But once we get down to their genus and species, we see that they're different. The house cat is in genus Felis, which is the lion is in, that's in genus Panthera. And the house cat is in species Catus, whereas the lion is in species Leo. So they have different genuses and different species. The table above shows that the 5 of the 7 groups for these 2 animals are the same. Only the genus and species groups are different. The lion and the house cat are very similar. They have many of the same traits. Look at the table on the next page to compare the classifications of 2 animals that are more different. The table compares the classification of a house cat with that of a deer. So comparing the classifications of a house cat and lion, that should actually say deer. I should say deer right there. So here's the group, the house cat and the deer. So they're in the same kingdom animal, in the same phylum chordate. Their class, they're both still mammals, but after that, they are completely different. Their order, the house cat is a carnivore, where the deer is Artodactyla. Family for the house cat is Felidae, and for the deer is Cervidae. Genus for the house cat is Felis, and for the deer is Odocoileus. And the species for the house cat is Catus. For the deer is Virginianus. So those are all, you can see that they have some of the same class kingdoms, phylums, and classes, but they have different orders, families, genuses, and species. Other evidences used in classifying. There are several other pieces of evidence that help scientists classify organisms. They are. Number one, classification can be based on a living thing's ancestors. An ancestor is a related organism that lived sometime in the past. For example, horses and donkeys have many of the same ancestors. They have more of the same ancestors than horses and goats do. Horses and goats have more of the same ancestors than horses and fish do. Of these pairs, horses and donkeys have the most ancestors in common and are the most related. 2. Similar body structures often show that living things have common ancestors. This is important in classification. You can see from the picture below that the front limbs of various animals and a human. Notice the limbs are all similar in their bone structures. These similarities show a common ancestor. All the limbs are similar enough, even though they do different things. They have similar bones arranged in similar patterns, which we've already talked about in this class, so they're highlighting those features again for you with even more organisms. 3. Another way to group living things is by body chemistry. A good example is the horseshoe crab. At first, the horseshoe crab was thought to be like other crabs. The blood of the horseshoe crab, however, is more like that of a spider. As a result, the horseshoe crab is actually now grouped with spiders. For many years, scientists have debated about how to classify the giant panda. Some classified it with raccoons, while others classified it with bears. Now, its body chemistry shows it to be more closely related with bears. So here is the classification review part 1. Your job is to go back through pages 1 through 4 and answer these questions. Number 1, name one place you come in contact with classification in your daily life. Number 2, what is the term used to mean grouping organisms or objects based on things they have in common? Number 3, who was the first person to classify living things? 4, what are the 3 things Linnaeus improved about Aristotle's system? A, B, and C. Number 5, what were Aristotle's kingdoms? A and B. Number 6, name 3 pieces of evidence scientists use to classify living organisms. 7, how many classification groups do a lion and a house cat have in common? And then match the classification level with its definition. So you've got the classification level and its definition. Name the levels for number 15 of classification from largest to smallest. So largest goes up here and the smallest classification level goes at the bottom. Your substitute should have told you this, but I do expect that all of these answers for numbers 1 through 7 are completed with complete sentences. That means that you should not have one-word answers. I do want to see sentences. So finish this, and if you finish this section, then I have section 2 in another video that you can search for.